Hey guys, what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace, either in rest or in recovery. With that out of the way, happy True Crime Thursday and welcome back to my channel, or just welcome if you've never been here before. Today we're looking into one of my favorite true crime cases ever, purely because I just find it absolutely so perplexing. But before we jump into it, I just need to put a little disclaimer that this case does involve sexual abuse and child abuse, so if you don't want to hear about it, click off. Today we're looking into the Menendez brothers and the murder of their parents. I'm going to go about this story a little bit differently to how I usually do, only because there is so much information to try and fit into one video that it's crazy if I go too much into their backstory, and yeah, you get the point, so bear with me. The Menendez brothers refers to two brothers, Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez, Lyle being the oldest. He was 21 at the time of the murders and Erik was only 18. Their parents were Jose and Mary, but Mary was also known as Kitty, so I'm just going to refer to her as Kitty. Their father was a Cuban immigrant and he was actually sent to America by his parents at 16 because they felt like it wasn't safe where they were, and so they sent him to go be safe. Obviously, this was a pretty huge adjustment, but it seemed like he adjusted pretty well. He got good grades, he was good in school, he played sports and he was really good at it. Swimming in particular, he was really good at. He grew up to be a very intelligent man, a very good businessman, and he went on to be a really successful entertainment executive. So he was bringing in quite a lot of money for the family. Now, Kitty had a teaching job, but she decided to leave that and focus on being a stay-at-home mum in 1968 when Lyle was born, and then they moved to New Jersey where Erik was born in 1970. Now, at the time, Jose was actually in accounting and he made the decision to make the shift into the music industry and work at a record label. So obviously this is a pretty dramatic change in career, but he was a very determined man and he was determined to be successful and, better yet, determined to be wealthy. By the 1980s, he was working for a record label called RCA, and this was a pretty well-known record label at the time, and they were known for signing Duran Duran, which is obviously a very famous band. Growing up in New Jersey, the brothers were sent to a private school where they had a lot of expectations and pressure on them to do well, to get good grades. From a very, very young age, it was drilled into them by Jose that they needed to be successful. They needed to be good at everything they did. They had to be the best in every class. They had to play every sport. They had to come first in every sport. Coming second was a huge failure in Jose's mind. This ideology and these expectations, it created a lot of pressure on the boys, and because Jose was so good at getting what he wanted, he often put that pressure on their teachers. So they'd feel that pressure not only from Jose but also from their teachers and their coaches and their instructors. They were under a lot of pressure from a very young age. This started at home with how they groomed themselves and how they presented themselves. Jose and Kitty were both very obsessed with their image and their reputation. And then once they were old enough to go to school, it became all about the academics and, beating everyone else and coming first in every class and getting all the awards that they could. And then once they were old enough to play sport, it became all about sport. They had to become the best at every sport they did. And as I said earlier, Jose was really good at swimming, so that's something he wanted to then pass down to his sons, and he tried to pass that down to Lyle, but Lyle was not a fan. He wasn't good at it, he didn't like it, and he didn't even like being in the water. And this proved, if you believe the brothers' testimonies, to be quite frustrating for Jose, because he wanted them to excel, especially in swimming, because that was something that was close to his own heart. But I'll get into that a little bit later. So when the brothers both took a liking to tennis, especially Erik, he was very happy with that. But obviously enjoying the sport wasn't good enough. So he pushed them and pushed them and pushed them and would show up at every match and coach them and be very, very stern with them when it came to how they played and what they should do and what coaches they should have, all of that. He was just very, very serious about it all. And Kitty used to go to every game, every match, whatever it's called, and be like their little cheerleader. So she enjoyed it too, and obviously enjoyed them being successful at what they were doing. So the expectation was there from both parents. They just had different ways of delivering it. So as I said, Erik was particularly good at tennis, and so he would actually travel for all these different tournaments, and he placed 44th in the United States for 18 and unders. So he was pretty good. Of course, 44th was a lot less than second, so Jose was less than impressed with that. In 1986, Jose had another career change. This time he changed to the movie industry, and so he packed up the family and they all moved to Beverly Hills, California. And here he would work for a company called Live Entertainment. Now this company had lost $20 million the year prior to Jose working for them. So it was a huge gamble, but it goes to show Jose's drive and mentality and belief in himself that he thought he could turn it all around, and turn it around he did. He actually increased their profits by $8 million in the year after he had begun working there. Obviously that profit jump is pretty full on, that's pretty incredible, and so that led to him becoming CEO of the company relatively fast. But this success as a businessman, this was due to his cutthroat, tactics in the business world. He got what he wanted, usually, and he didn't always play fair to get there, and that wasn't just a business strategy, that was ingrained into his entire personality. Anything he wanted, he would go out and get it, and it didn't matter what was in his way. Nothing was gonna stop that man. As I'm sure you can imagine, this quality in a businessman is very valuable to a company. And so when the company started taking out life insurance policies, they obviously took one out on Jose, and that was worth $14 million. And they actually took two out on him. One in which they would be the beneficiaries for, and the other one where anyone could be the beneficiary of. So the second one was worth $5 million. As I said before, Kitty and Jose were all about appearances, all about their reputation, all about their image. And in part, this was due because of the people they were surrounded by. So obviously being very high up in this movie industry company, Jose was surrounded by very high profile people. And so he felt he needed to have a very certain reputation. And then Kitty was surrounded by just rich people, just wealthy people. And so she also felt like she had to, uphold a certain reputation. But it's a little bit funny because Jose at work actually had a really rotten reputation. Most people that had worked with him or worked under him really hated him because he was really cutthroat and he would fire people like that, and he was very unforgiving. He was rude, he was pig-headed, and so a lot of people actually despised him. But because that was his idea of success and that was his idea of going out and getting what you wanted, he knew he had this reputation and he enjoyed it. He was actually proud of that. So he would put all of these expectations on the kids, and especially Lyle, because Lyle was less conventionally attractive as opposed to Erik. And so he would often shame Lyle and make fun of him, demean him, embarrass him, and put just enormous amounts of pressure for him to look better. And he went so far as to force his child son, Lyle, to wear a toupee because he had started to lose hair and had like a receding hairline at 15 years old. And so his dad forced him to wear a toupee and didn't tell a soul. Nobody even knew that he wore this thing. It was a complete secret. So after moving to California, the boys both attended Beverly Hills High. And at this point, Lyle had started to just get really over the pressure that his dad was putting on him. And so he started to rebel against it a little bit, not necessarily rebelling against his dad because that was too much, but he would just rebel against the expectations his dad had for him. So he wouldn't go to school as often as he should, and he wouldn't do the right things necessarily all the time, which was his little way of being like, fuck this, I have some sort of control, because other than that, he really had no control over his life. And don't get me wrong, he was still doing great in school. He still maintained his grades. He was set to leave for college a year after they moved to California, and you know, he maintained all of that, but he did start to rebel after moving. And so he started hanging out with people who were doing shady shit, so then he started doing shady shit, and then he brought Erik in as well. So they actually started doing small robberies, and they did a number of these until Erik and Lyle decided that they would go off on their own and do their own robberies. So in one instance, they planned a robbery with a friend of theirs. They went and robbed a safe, and they came out with $100,000. $100,000. Mind you, they're already rich. They absolutely did not need this money in any way, shape, or form, but they did it anyway. And then they had the audacity to cut their friend out of the deal when their friend is the one that gave them the code to the safe, which, I mean, he doesn't need the money either. But the point is that they snaked their friend. And that just goes to show that they were perfectly capable of lying and cheating and sneaking around. So when they got caught, and they only got caught because their friend ratted them out because he got cut out of the deal, Jose was not mad about this robbery. He was mad, however, that they got caught for this robbery. He actually knew about a lot of the other robberies, and he had previously paid off police officers so that the boys wouldn't get in trouble, or he would sweet talk his way out of a lot of situations the brothers had put themselves in. So when this happened, there was legal implications, because obviously $100,000 is quite a lot of friggin' money to steal from somebody. And so he came up with this plan that Lyle, because he was an adult, he would not take any of the blame because he would get in trouble, and he was meant to be going to college very, very shortly. So he forced Erik to take the entirety of the blame, and he was made to go to community service as well as mandated therapy. And this just goes to show Jose's mindset was that he could just get away with whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. And if he couldn't, he'd just make someone else, you know? He didn't give a shit if Erik got the full brunt of it, because as long as Lyle was going to college, things were a-okay. So this therapy that Erik had to go to, he was introduced to a doctor called Dr. Oziel, but I'll get into that later. So a year after moving to California, Lyle moves back to New Jersey so that he can attend Princeton University, which is a huge deal for Jose, because that is something he desperately wanted for his sons, was to go to Ivy League schools, because that's something he never got to achieve himself. He went to a regular college, which is where he met his wife, so I mean, he should be happy regardless. But that was a big deal to him, and he was super proud. So the relationship between Jose and Lyle, in my opinion, was absolutely bizarre, because they were both really, really close and really, really distant all at once. Having watched all of the trial videos and all of the testimonies, it's not really hard to draw the conclusion that Lyle was the favorite son. It seems like Jose just did not believe in Erik at all. I really don't know why, but all of the expectation was pretty much on Lyle. Like, if anyone was going to be successful, it was going to be Lyle. If anyone was going to make anything for themselves, it was Lyle. But as I said, as they moved to California, he was starting to rebel against this. And he started to rebel against his mum as well, because his mum, Kitty, was super involved in his life, in his social life and in his dating life, which, if you're about to leave to college, you don't want that. He's starting to take dating seriously. He's starting to take girls seriously. He's starting to take his life seriously. And his mum is meddling in his life. Like, that was absolutely not what he wanted. So when he had the chance to go to Princeton University and move away, he jumped on that shit so friggin' quick. He was over the moon. But this move was super, super hard on Erik, because growing up, the brothers had been really, really close. They were like tight as anything, and Lyle had always adopted like a very protective role over Erik. So when Lyle went away, Erik really, really struggled, and that was in part because of, you know, the pressure from his parents, and in part just because he missed Lyle, which was like his best friend, one of his only friends, because the brothers were so close. It was hard for other people to even really interact with them. On top of that, the brothers had already alienated themselves from everybody else, because despite growing up in a very wealthy area, in a school filled with wealthy kids, they just had such a skewed perception of what the world was really like and how it really worked and how money worked and how valuable money was. To them, money was like nothing, you know? And so even in a school full of rich kids, they were just different. They were also just very sneaky people that would do shady shit constantly. And that's really no surprise, having grown up with Jose teaching them everything, because that was how he lived his life. They also became really, really spoiled in a number of ways, not just the money, but because they never faced any consequences of their own actions, because Jose would just make it go away with a check. And it was like that. So during this time while Lyle was away, Erik felt very, very alone, and it was a really hard time for him, and he developed really bad like anxiety issues, and just, he was a very withdrawn kid at this point. Luckily for him, it didn't last very long, because Lyle, as I said, was rebelling. He didn't really want to be at college, so he just didn't really show up very often. He missed a lot of classes, and if he did show up, he'd show up late. And then he got caught plagiarizing in his psychology class, so he actually got suspended. And Jose wasn't mad that he plagiarized. He was, however, mad that he got caught, but he was mostly angry at the dean of the school, who refused to let them get away with it, because usually, as I said, he'd just give them some money and it'd all go away. And the dean absolutely refused to do that. They took it way too seriously, and so Lyle had to move back to California with the family, and his dad got him a job at Live Entertainment, a job in which he was very lazy at, did not want to be there, purely was there because of his dad. Lyle was just not into business the way that his dad was. He actually had more of a like creative streak, which Jose thought was inferior to business. He just thought it was like so less than, and so he took absolutely no interest in Lyle's creativity, in the fact that he really enjoyed writing. Jose paid it absolutely no mind, which is actually surprising to me, because he works in the music industry and the movie entertainment industry, so it absolutely blows my mind that he wouldn't see that there is merit in that. But the pressure and the judgment really increased at this point. There was so much judgment on Lyle that it was heavy. So if we fast forward to the 20th of August 1989, Jose and Kitty decided that they would stay in for the night and watch movies in their den, which was sort of at the back of the house. And so the brothers, around 10 p.m, went into the den. Their mum was asleep, and so Lyle pretty much didn't waste any time. He pretty much immediately shot his dad in the back of the head, and he used a shotgun. So at that close distance, that's a lot of damage, and it's also very loud. So it woke Kitty up, and part of their agreement between the brothers was that Erik was supposed to shoot the mum and Lyle was supposed to shoot the dad. So obviously Lyle had held up his end of their agreement, but Erik was too busy panicking and freaking out and not knowing what to do to shoot his mum. He said he just could not do it. And so she almost escaped. She had managed to climb over the lounge and like sort of scramble away from them, try and get into the hallway. And so Lyle went after her and shot her a number of times, first hitting her leg, which completely shattered the bone. So obviously she's fallen onto the floor, and then he's continued shooting her until he's ran out of bullets. She's still not dead though. So they exit the room to reload the bullets, and then he goes back in and empties all the bullets again, this time killing Kitty by shooting her in the face. So by the time they were finished, Kitty was like completely unrecognizable, and Jose had a hole like this big in his head. So it was very brutal. And then on top of that, they kneecapped them. They shot them in the kneecaps. And this was believed to be done to try and throw investigators off, to try and make it seem like it was like affiliated with the mob or a gang or some sort of like organized crime like that. So around 11 p.m, Lyle makes a phone call to 911, and he reports that his parents have been shot and that they've been killed, that someone's come and killed their parents. And honestly, when I watched the trial, this blew me away, because he is hysterical on this phone call, and I'll try and put a clip of it in, but he is like just so believable that he's just walked home and found his parents like this, and it just, it's crazy. And then when he's being cross-examined and being asked these questions, why did you lie, how did you do all this, he was so composed and so prepared for what he was going to say about why he lied and how he could do it and what was going through his head and all these excuses. It is just honestly remarkable to watch.
Units are on. What happened? Who shot who? You came home and found who shot?
I'm in bed.
You're in bed?
No, they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting. Get away from them.
Okay. Hey, let me talk to Erik. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second.
Oh.
Hello, this is police department.
Yes.
Okay, I want you to come outside. Okay, just come out the front door and
Never to my brother.
you tell your brother. Everybody that's come outside.
Okay.
When the police arrived on the scene, the brothers come out of the house, out the front, and they were hysterical. The police officers said that they were both crying, and Erik went and collapsed on the front lawn and was hyperventilating and screaming, like proper screaming, squealing, uncontrollably, like he was in a full panic. And so they said that Lyle was trying to calm him down, but he was also seemingly hysterical himself. And this is just one of the many weird things about the case, is how wholeheartedly these officers bought into this show, this act, because essentially that is what it was. It was a show because they were lying. They had just killed their parents, and the officers were just so taken aback by their grief. Like, it actually emotionally impacted the officers. They felt so bad for them and so sorry for them, and were just in absolute horror when they went and saw the state of the parents. Their bodies were blown to pieces. They believed the brothers' alibi, which was essentially that they had just gone and seen a movie. They tried to watch one movie first, and then they went and bought a ticket to a different movie, and that's where they'd been, and then they just returned home and found their parents like this. And the officers were so caught up in this story and the emotion of this story that they didn't do any forensic testing on the brothers at all that night, which could have saved a lot of time. So immediately the investigators assumed that it was related to the mob, or it was some sort of hit like that because of the kneecapping and the severity of the crime. I mean, obviously murder is always severe because it's murder, but like, this was brutal. Like, they had put a huge hole in their dad's head, and then they'd shot their mum so many times in the face and the body and shattered her leg, and it was just brutal. Like, it was really, really gruesome. And the brothers had no hesitation in further insisting that, yeah, it was the mob. Like, dad has some sketchy business partners. He's done some shady deals in the past. Like, they were really dropping hints left, right, and center that it was mob related. But this mob theory didn't necessarily explain why Kitty was also murdered. And so the investigators had to consider all of the possibilities. And as I mentioned earlier, Jose had a really bad reputation at work, which meant he had a lot of people that hated him, which meant that the pool of suspects was a lot larger than they originally assumed. So from here, the brothers started living out of hotels, and they were really, really pushing this whole innocent act. They started wearing bulletproof vests, and they hired bodyguards with their parents' money, and claimed to be so in fear of their lives that, like, they couldn't stand to go back to the mansion. They couldn't stand to not wear, like, protective gear, and they had to have security with them at all times. Like, they were terrified. They really, really put on an act. But as I mentioned before, their sense of reality was a little bit skewed. Their sense of money and its value was so skewed that they just started spending money immediately, like large sums of money immediately. And to them, that was not suspicious at all. To them, that was like perfectly normal. Like, why wouldn't they spend money? Which is like how are you that disconnected from reality? So the brothers started to buy a lot of really materialistic things that were just so unnecessary, like Rolexes and shoes and clothes and accessories, and they came to their parents' funerals completely decked out in new, fancy, expensive stuff. And the spending is what caught people's attention and caught the investigators' attention, but it was Lyle in particular, his demeanor, that really kept people, you know, interested in the brothers, because he was just very, very casual about their death and the fact that they had died. And it was a brutal murder, don't forget, very, very brutal. And he was acting like he was fine. Mind you, he's the one that was supposedly, you know, walked in and found them. So he should have been an absolute wreck, but he wasn't. He was very calm, he was very composed. He was making jokes about his dad at his funeral. And to a lot of people, he just seemed really unemotional and really unbothered, and that was really bizarre. So from here, the brothers attempted to set themselves up. Obviously, the dad is gone. He's not there to bring in money anymore. They were set to inherit a fair chunk of money. Fair fucking chunk. But they attempted to set themselves up. So Lyle went out and actually bought a restaurant, which he planned on franchising, and then he went and started his own company called the Menendez Investment Enterprises, and then he went and hired a bunch of his old buddies from Princeton, and then he went and bought a Porsche. Erik made moves to try and set his future up as well, although they were very different. He didn't have the business experience that Lyle had. Although he wasn't at school for very long at Princeton, he was doing a business degree, so he had a little bit of experience, and he had worked with his dad and was a little bit older and a little bit more attuned to that type of stuff. Erik, on the other hand, he decided he actually wanted to go pro at tennis. So he went out and bought a car as well. He went and got a Jeep Wrangler, and then he started paying for like really professional tennis lessons, and they ended up costing like a fair chunk of money because it was a very prestigious coach and it was private lessons, so that was a big deal. The brothers ended up moving back into the family mansion, but only for a short period of time before they then went and bought 2 condos that were adjoining in Marina del Rey, and they started living there and then started throwing these massive parties, which again is a very odd thing to do had your parents just been killed like the way that they were. Although I feel like it's kind of hard to say what anybody would do if their parents were killed, because you just don't know until you're in that situation. So who's to say that you wouldn't just want to go spend money and party? I don't know. I don't want to put that judgment on them. Anyway, Erik had gotten into gambling at this point and had lost quite a chunk of money. And so he started taking tennis very seriously. It was already his plan to take it seriously, but he actually started putting it into action now. And so at this point, he had like the full team, the full kit and caboodle, like the coaches, the nutritionists, the weight trainers, just everything. So after only 6 months of their parents being dead, they had already spent $700,000 of their parents' money, which is a lot of money. Of course, to the brothers, this wasn't like a considerable chunk of money in their world, because they were set to inherit a lot of money from their parents' death, because as I mentioned earlier, Jose had not 1 but 2 life insurance policies taken out on him. One worth $14 million and the other worth $5 million, so that's a lot of money. This money would take a little bit longer for them to be able to access though, because all of the legal proceedings, like it had to be settled, and because it was through the company that he worked for, it was a slower process. But at the end of the day, they knew that money was coming in, and so they didn't really care if they took like a chunk out of what they already had now. So the investigators at this point were sort of watching over the brothers and seeing what they were doing and how they were acting. They thought Lyle was very unbothered, very relaxed, very just unemotional about the whole thing, which to them was a red flag. But Erik, on the other hand, he was a very anxious person. He was very unsettled by his parents' death, and he was very rattled, you know, and he showed that in his behavior. And so while the brothers were waiting for these life insurance policy things, the investigators started looking into what exactly the brothers were purchasing. And so they went back through their transaction history and they found out that the brothers had actually purchased shotguns 3 days prior to the parents' murders. And so they were like, Jesus Christ, like this is so obvious now. And so obviously out of the two brothers, they thought Erik, out of everyone, was going to be the one who was going to crack under pressure because he was already such an anxious, jittery person as it was. And so they started working with one of the brothers' friends, and this friend took him out to lunch, and unbeknown to Erik, he was going to report everything that was said to him back to the police. So he actually confessed. Erik confessed to the murder and explained exactly what happened to this friend, but the friend didn't have any type of like wire or recording device on him at this first lunch. And so when he told the police were like, okay, we'll take him out for another lunch. You know, this time you're going to be prepared. We're going to get it all on tape. There we go. But this time when he took him out to lunch, Erik denied everything, absolutely everything. So that got them nowhere. But at this time, the investigators started to speak to Erik's therapist, which was Dr. Oziel. So Dr. Oziel claimed that Erik was just under like an immense amount of stress at this time. He said that he was more anxious than he had ever been. He was really struggling to cope with a lot of things, and he'd actually started to get ulcers because of how much stress he was putting on his body. And this is where things just get bizarrely messy with the doctor, and this is why I think he's just of a human, like just he decided that it's just so stupid. It's like, how he decided that when Erik had confessed all this, he would persuade Erik to call his brother Lyle and get Lyle to come down to the therapist's office under some pretense, and then he thought to himself he would just record the entire thing and he would eventually take it to the police. But not only did he call Lyle into the office, he also called his mistress into the office and got her to wait at the front door, like of the office where they actually do the meeting, the therapy, whatever. And she was supposed to just wait there and eavesdrop, and if anything bad happened, then call the police. Otherwise, he was just going to record the whole thing, say he wasn't going to tell them, and then like later go and tell the police. Which, can we just pause for a second? This man is a qualified psychologist, right? So he would have been able to make a very educated assumption as to what Lyle's reaction might be like, yeah? He's a doctor. I feel like it would be a fair assumption to make that Lyle would not be happy about the fact that Erik had confessed about 2 very brutal murders that he and his brother committed. And because of that, I feel like it's very fair to assume that Lyle may have an angry reaction to this. Therefore, I also feel like it's fair to assume that telling your mistress to come and wait at the door without police or protection is a very dumb idea. He, for some reason, thought this was an excellent idea, and so he went through with it. And when Lyle got there and found out, he felt not only betrayed, not only panicked, but also very backed into a corner, because now this man, this therapist, knew about a murder that he had committed. And so he was not happy, and he was very afraid of what this doctor could do. And so he lost it and decided that he would threaten Dr. Oziel and say that if he told anyone, he'd kill him. This doctor, I simply do not have words for. Instead of, after this session, this therapy session, instead of going straight to the police with the recording of Lyle literally threatening his life and confessing to the murders, instead of going to the police and that, he decided to sit on that information. He decided that he would continue these therapy sessions with the brothers. And he decided that he would record all of these therapy sessions and get as many details about the murders as possible. And then he'd go to the police, later. Which is not his decision to make, nor is it a smart decision to make or a safe decision to make, because had they been absolute nutjob murderers, they could have gone out and killed multiple other people in that time. So while it's a positive thing that he got all these different details, that's not his decision to make, and he fucking knew that. Eventually, the police were informed about all of these tape recordings and all of this information, but not because Dr. Oziel went to the police. No, his mistress took his therapy notes that he had in a wardrobe, no one else's, mind you, just theirs.
Which goes to show that he was up to something shady, because why would you take that? Anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Point is, the mistress went and told the investigators that this was all going on and that they'd confessed and that there was all these tapes and, you know, whatever. So on the 8th of March 1990, Lyle was arrested in his driveway for the murder of his parents. Erik, on the other hand, was actually overseas in Israel for a tennis tournament. So they arrested Lyle immediately, as soon as they could, because they felt like he was a really big flight risk. Anyway, he was informed at around 5 a.m. the next morning that his brother had been arrested and that there was a warrant out for his arrest. And he absolutely lost it. Everybody that was around him when he found out said that he just was in hysterics, absolutely panicked, didn't know what to do. And so he actually caught a flight to Miami to visit relatives, and then he caught a flight to LAX, obviously to go home, and he was arrested at LAX. So this is where the story gets a little bit more intricate. The Menendez brothers had one of the first trials to be aired publicly on court TV for entertainment purposes, and so the media frenzy around this trial was just astronomical. It was huge. They were tried separately and had two different juries and two different defense teams, but their trials were held at the same time, so they would sort of take turns, but it was separate, which is a little bit bizarre. And Erik was being defended by a very famous attorney called Leslie Abraham, and she is just incredible. She is really against the death penalty, and that's the punishment that the prosecution was actually asking. So she was just incredible. Watching her was, she's very good at her job.
You're not letting me answer, Ms. Abramson.
I'm asking you to answer the question.
You're not allowing me to answer it. You're not allowing me to answer.
Number one, ask the question again.
Dr. Oziel, is there any place in these notes of October 31st, before Lyle arrives, where Erik uses the word perfect, according to these notes, anywhere?
No, not in those notes.
Thank you.
Like, she would definitely make me cry. So originally, the brothers pled not guilty. And this was because they felt like there wasn't enough evidence against them at the time. They thought that all these tapes that were recorded were going to fall under doctor-patient confidentiality. And to an extent they did, but two of the tapes were admissible in court purely because Lyle had threatened Dr. Oziel, so that sort of trumped the confidentiality and therefore made them admissible in court, which therefore meant that they had a confession against them. So they actually had to change their plea, and they changed it to a self-defense plea. They now started claiming that it was in self-defense because for the entirety of their lives they had been subject to physical, psychological, and sexual abuse at the hands of their mother and father. They claimed that their father was a pedophile who repeatedly molested them for a large chunk of their lives. In particular, Erik, who claims he was molested up until 17, and mind you, the murders were done when he was only 18. So that is very fresh and recent, if you're to believe their testimony. They also claimed that he would be really physically abusive as a way to teach them, what to do. He had really sadistic methods of punishing them. They also claimed that their mother was an alcoholic, she was a drug addict. They claimed that she was just an absolute mess of a woman, did not take care of them from a young age, left them to do everything themselves, didn't care if they were dirty and unhygienic and would get sick and all that. They also claimed that not only did she know about the abuse, but she enabled Jose when it came to the abuse and also protected him. So now there was absolutely no question in anybody's minds. The brothers did kill the parents, but now it was a matter of whether or not it was premeditated murder or whether it was self-defense, because they truly feared for their lives. During all of this trial, they were being held at jail. I don't know, I just laughed, that's not funny. They were being held in jail. They were not released on bail because they were too much of a flight risk. So they had to stay in jail, and because this case was so heavily publicized, all of the inmates knew that they had a ton of money, and so they were actually forced to pay for protection in jail, because otherwise they were just gonna get like messed up for their money. So I watched hours and hours of their trial. I think I watched it over like 5 days, like non-stop, and the cross-examination of the brothers with Leslie was so intense. They were able to recount so many different instances of these, you know, abuse allegations, and she just made sure that every single detail was laid out for everybody. She made sure that they felt uncomfortable, that they were distressed, that they were crying, that all of it was out there, you know. So it came out that Jose had been molesting both of the brothers since they were very, very young. But as I said, it was in particular Erik all the way up until he was 17 years old. He had started to molest Lyle from a very young age as well.
I just told him that I didn't want to do this and that it hurt me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
And so his dad was like, okay, and just sort of walked away. And so Lyle thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. He came back another time and did it again. And so he went to his mum and he told his mum and said, like, I don't want him to do this anymore. Like, can you please make him stop? And she pretty much just shut him down and was like, no, this isn't happening. That never happened. Like, don't say that to anyone ever again. Like, it just completely squashed it. After that, Jose stopped attacking Lyle, but at that point, Jose started to focus his attention on Erik. And Erik was a really loving kid. He had a lot of love for his dad. He had a lot of respect for his dad. He looked up to him and he wanted to be like him. And so when this stuff happened between him and his dad, he believed his dad when he said, like, no, this is our special time. Like, this is normal. This is okay, you know? He really believed that. There were 2 members of his family that were able to at least corroborate the idea that they'd been told or they'd heard about this sexual assault. Erik did tell his cousin, and he actually asked his cousin, like, do you and your dad do that? Like, do you guys have massages too? Because that's what they called it at the time. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on YouTube, so I'm just not going to say it, but like, you know what I mean. And so his cousin was able to confirm that that had happened at the time they're being kids. Like, he thought it was weird, but he never did anything about it because, like, they're kids, you know, that's a lot to take on. And then there was another family member, an adult, that actually heard about it and did go to Kitty and asked her, but same as what she did with Lyle, she just shut it down. No, that never happened. No. So nothing ever came from that either. So as Erik's going into all these details, but he had different names for the different kinds of abuse that he would cop. He'd say that sometimes his dad would be nice and it would be like a loving thing. Loving, like... But then there were times where he would be rough and use objects, and Erik didn't like those times.
He would stick things in me as he was giving me oral sex, or at times he would just sit on the bed with his legs up, spread, and with his back to the back of the bed, and he would have me give him oral sex, and he would stick the needles or the tacks into my thighs as he was doing this.
As well as the sexual abuse, there was also the physical abuse, the claims of physical abuse, and at this point it was no secret that, like, Jose was very hard on them and expected a lot from them.
Well, he would take my chair. I had a wooden chair, and he would take it and he would put it in front of the mirror, or he would have me stand up in the mirror. If it was after sex, I'd be doing it naked. If it was after tennis, I'd have my tennis clothes on, and he'd walk around behind me and ask me questions.
What kinds of questions?
He would say, how did you feel today when you were on the tennis court? Did you feel you did well?
And now what was supposed to happen, if anything, when he said wrong?
I'd have to hit myself in the head. I'd have to go like this.
What if you didn't hit yourself hard enough, or if you didn't do it, or if you missed? What would happen?
He'd hit me
And where would he hit you?
in the back of the head.
On top of that, Lyle also claims that his mum from a very young age would do genital exams on him. And this slowly progressed into kisses and...
Would she ask you how she looked?
Yes.
And sometimes when she asked you how she looked, would she be inappropriately attired?
She would be topless.
They would start to have sex. This would happen a lot. And so he would actually want to sleep in Kitty's bed because he claimed he was a willing participant at that point. Like, he was a kid, it felt good to him. It didn't hurt the way like it did with his dad, you know? And to him, this was the only time his mum was nice to him, because she was nicer to Erik than she was to Lyle, because she had this weird, bizarre relationship with Lyle. And so outside of the bedroom, she was an absolute monster to him. So as a kid, that's the only way he gets love from his mum. That made sense to him.
Your relationship with your mother was never good before that, is that correct?
No.
Was it worse after that?
Oh, yeah, she was just... she was pretty much zeroed in on me.
As I mentioned, Kitty was also very, very involved in his social life and his dating life.
I always had problems with her, with my girlfriends, yes.
And he claims that this was because of what was going on between them. He claims she was getting jealous and she didn't want all these girls around him, because when he started wanting to have sex with other girls, he can't keep having sex with his mum.
She was, you know, very, this really was more than critical. It was just like humiliating who my girlfriends were as people.
And so she wouldn't get what she wanted from him, because she wasn't getting it from Jose, from her husband, because he was too busy having multiple long-term affairs, which was actually common knowledge at his workplace, which is awful, but yeah. So leading up to the murders, Erik's 18, he's getting ready to go away for college. He was super married to this idea of just freedom, getting away. And then when his dad told him that he wasn't going away for college, he was going to stay with him, he had to stay with his dad, he lost it. The reason that he felt his dad wasn't going to let him go was because his dad didn't want to stop these sexual interactions that they were having. And Erik was desperate for it to end. So he was just absolutely devastated. So at this point, he actually went to Lyle and he told Lyle why he was so depressed, because Lyle just couldn't understand why it was so bad. He's like, dude, chill. So for the first time, he explained to Lyle what was going on between him and his dad. Lyle was obviously gutted to hear this, but he wasn't surprised because of his own interaction with his dad when he was a kid. He was horrified, however, to know that it was still going on for Erik at 17 years old. I can't even begin to imagine how hard that would be for a 17-year-old boy to be copping from his dad, a dad who was also very openly homophobic and would make fun of the boys and call them gay and call them slurs and like awful stuff. So it was really ingrained to them that that was not okay and that was disgusting, and yet he was forced to like participate in that. So now Lyle went to his mum and he told her, and he said like, this needs to stop. And she had the same reaction she did every other time in the past, where she tried to shut it down, and she blamed him and blamed Erik, and it was a whole thing, right? So they start having this argument in the den, and Erik hears like this commotion going on. So at that point, Lyle exits the room and Kitty comes following after him and actually grabs his toupee and like rips it off his head. And they go into a lot more detail about this in the court trial tapes if you are really interested. But he rips it off his head. And up until this point, Erik didn't even know that his brother, they were this close together. He didn't even know that he was balding. He didn't even know that he wore a toupee. That was the first time he found out he was wearing a toupee, and that just demonstrates how secretive this family really was, that they even had to uphold these like certain images to each other, you know? Like it's crazy. So after this, Lyle was absolutely furious. He was so mad, and so it took him a little while, but he worked up like the courage to go speak to his dad. He was like, I have to take care of my brother, or so he claimed. And so he went to his dad all prepared what he was going to say, and he said, like, you gotta stop doing this, you gotta leave him alone, you gotta let him go to college, like, enough is enough. And Jose pretty much responded like, it's my son, I'll do what I want. And so from that point, the brothers were so defeated, especially Erik. Like, he was distraught, he was so devastated, because he thought all this abuse is just going to get worse and it's going to continue, and like his life is over, he's never going to escape, he's never going to have a girlfriend, he's never going to do any of these things that like normal people get to do, and he's just subject to this for the rest of his life. And so they claim to have felt very backed into a corner. They felt like it was either they're going to get abused for the rest of their life or their dad's going to kill them. Now at the time, the media was very one-sided, and they just didn't have like a lot of sympathy for the brothers and for the story that they were telling, and there were reasons for that, especially at that time. But like recently, the media's completely switched up and tends to believe the brothers now and be very one-sided in favor of the brothers. And so I kind of want to give you like both perspectives of what's going on, because I feel like documentaries and articles, it depends on who's writing it, right? It depends on who's creating it and what they believe, because at the end of the day, not many people are like impartial. So I'm going to try. So the brothers did have a criminal history that had escalated as they got older and was continuing to escalate as they got older. They also never really suffered any consequences to any of their actions, because Jose would just, you know, make it go away. He'd flush a check and it'd be fine. So they never really learned that there were consequences to their actions. The only consequences they knew were that Jose gave them, which was not going to happen. Obviously, he was dead. They were never made to make it on their own, you know, money wise, financially. So they did become really spoiled. They did become very privileged, materialistic and selfish boys. They were raised on his morals or lack thereof, and so they were very sneaky. They were good at lying, they were good at manipulating, they were good at hiding things because they had to, because of their parents. And they were known to be very shady, like the example of snaking their friend, that cutting him out of a deal that like he was a part of. They did very shady things, and they weren't trusted, and a lot of people that knew them thought that they were spoilt brats. And even their friends, majority of them claimed that they had been like betrayed by them at some point, snaked by them at some point. Nobody really trusted them, so they had really bad reputations. Prosecutors tried to argue that they had no remorse for what they had done, which they were able to sort of demonstrate with the way that Lyle was acting at the funeral and after their deaths, and making jokes and just being very nonchalant about the whole thing. They also put on a spectacular show for the officers at the crime scene, especially Lyle on the 911 call. And then even after being arrested and charged, they pled not guilty because they thought there wasn't enough evidence. So it wasn't until they were really backed into a corner that they started offering things up. And that was really only to try and get out of it by saying, hey, like, we're victims. So it makes sense to think that they are lying. They also spoke to Kitty's therapist, because she was also in therapy. She had a lot of her own sort of issues and whatever. And her therapist claimed that she was terrified of her sons, that she locked her door every night before she went to bed because she was so scared of them. And apparently she thought that they were sociopaths and she was afraid of them. And then there was also this movie that came out just before the murders, and the brothers had just seen it very shortly before the murders. And this movie was about rich boys who killed their dad to get even more rich, and they were like decked out in Rolexes, which Lyle bought 3 Rolexes right after his parents' death. And then in the movie they also drove a Jeep Wrangler, which Erik went out and bought. So that was just very weird. Not to mention how actually brutal the crime scene was, how brutal the murders were, how gruesome it was. The crime scene photos were almost not even shown in court because of how like traumatizing they were. They'd both been shot multiple times, and then kneecaps. Like that's not self-defense. even if you thought you had to kill them, that's still not self-defense. That's still thinking how to get out of it and blaming yourself or trying to make it look worse. And then of course there was the spending and the monetary gain of all these life insurance policies, and just, yeah. There was a lot of reasons to believe that they were full of shit, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But then there was also a lot of reasons to believe them, because not only did they, you know, have obviously their own testimonies and whatever, but they actually had evidence. They had photographs that their dad had taken of them from like the waist down, like it was purely of their genitals, and for that reason. And Erik couldn't even look at the photo. He was absolutely horrified. Mind you, this is a photo of a child's genitals being shown to an entire courtroom, and then an entire, like, it's being broadcasted like that. That's a lot. But either way, no matter how you look at it, they killed the parents. So I guess it's a matter of just like, did they deserve the death penalty for it, or did they deserve like a couple years in jail? So both brothers ended up having a mistrial due to both juries deadlocking, which means there was at least one person on the jury that didn't want to find them guilty, and so they deadlocked. So then they had to have a retrial, and this time they were actually tried together, which previously I mentioned they were tried separately. So now there was one jury. And because of the result last time, they felt like it just wasn't helpful to be broadcasted the way it was. It was just too much of a like media frenzy. And so this time it was a private trial. This time only Erik testified instead of both of them testifying. I don't know what the thought process behind that decision was, but only Erik testified, and he kind of stuffed up. He got caught in a lie, which is ultimately why I think the jury decided what they did. He claimed that like 3 years prior to the murders, he was so in fear for his life that he went out and bought pistols, and he gave like a lot of details as to what he bought, where he bought it, you know, why he bought it, all that. And they were able to prove that the place he bought it from wasn't even open. So because he was caught out in that lie, the jury felt like if he can lie about that, he could be lying about anything on the stand, because I mean, you're under oath at the end of the day. So he lost a lot of credibility then, and then because Lyle wasn't even testifying, it just made it very, very hard. In the defense, their tactic was to go after Dr. Oziel. They tried to discredit him because, I mean, at the end of the day, that like biggest chunk of evidence they even had against the brothers was because of Dr. Oziel. So if they could prove that he was like incompetent and discredit him, then maybe they could get the evidence chucked out. So they went to the jury with this theory that Dr. Oziel was never going to go to the police. He did not record them for good reason. They tried to pretty much make out that he had planned on collecting all of this evidence against them just to then blackmail them and get money out of them. They claimed he had no intention of ever going to the police with this information. And I mean, that wasn't really hard to put out there because he didn't go to the police. His mistress went to the police. Like, you're not allowed to have your patient's notes laying around your house for like someone to go take to the police. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not confidentiality. That's ridiculous. So he was pretty easy to discredit. And then the way he carried on the stands was absolutely shameful. Like, absolutely shameful. Anyway, because they went so hard against him, his mistress actually ended up like filing complaints against him, and then it was recommended that he lose his license. But ultimately, I think because of Erik being caught in a lie, the jury decided that he was guilty. The jury found Erik and Lyle Menendez both guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and they were subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole, and they were both sent to different prisons for the next 22 years until they were finally reunited. And then at that point they were put into like protective things. They both appealed this decision a number of times, but they were unsuccessful every time. Even when they went like higher and higher, they were really trying, but yeah, they didn't get anywhere. I think honestly, in my opinion, it's really hard. I really don't know, because clearly they're good liars, right? So even if you are to believe their stories about abuse and all this stuff that they endured, chances are they're embellishing at least a little bit. And so it's like, how, I don't know how much of it is really true. I feel like if anything, I'm leaning towards Lyle possibly, maybe, potentially being a sociopath or having some type of like antisocial personality traits or behaviors, and potentially manipulating Erik into, you know, being involved, which isn't that hard to believe because it's not the first time that Erik's taken the fall for something that Lyle has, you know, like cooked up and then done. And Lyle is the one that shot them, so I don't know, I find it very hard. It did seem like he wanted to protect his brother, but then also at the same time it's like maybe he's just a really good liar, and maybe the same way his dad convinced Erik that he loved him and that's why he was doing that, maybe Lyle convinced him that he was protecting him and that's why he did all the things he did, but really it was for selfish reasons. I really don't know, but that's where I will leave it to you to make your own opinions, and please drop them in the comments down below or message me on any of my socials, which are all linked in the description, because I would actually love to hear your opinions on this because I really don't even know what mine is. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to leave a like or subscribe if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for watching. Stay safe. Bye. Oh my god, I almost fell off the